Wade's been answering the most popular questions regarding white-tailed deer. Let's see what he has to say about this next question.
Another question that I see pop up from different people is, I get busted in my stand a lot when I move to shoot, or when I'm just sitting there, or I don't even know the deer's there and I hear it blowing off in the distance. And man, there's so many variables to that question, in my opinion, and that you couldn't answer it with one just great answer there overall. But there's a few things that I think I've picked up on, and the mistakes that I've made in the past that date back to climbing up in my first deer stand when I was 10 years old, about 40 years ago. And fast forwarding to now, and sometimes still making some of the same mistakes unknowingly out there. But as I look forward now, I really try to pay attention to what's behind me and how it's lit up based on the times of the day I might be hunting, and make sure I've got a lot of back cover up there. Secondly, I really spend a lot of time now anticipating what I think the deer are going to be doing and where they're coming from, and giving myself a lot of cover in those angles, giving myself a little more attention to detail in some of those scenarios. Well, I start in my mind visualizing exactly what I'm going to do in that hunting scenario if the right deer comes out, and I don't want to get busted necessarily while he's coming from the left or right. I've already in my mind practiced, when he's right behind that tree, that's when I need to draw. When he's moving here, that's when I need to be anchored. That's going to give me a better chance to be prepared when he steps out from behind a tree or behind a bush to make the shot that I'm looking to make. I'll be the first to admit that I spend a lot of time, reading different data online and looking at things, and reading about studies about deer management, reading studies and case histories that people have dealt with when it comes to management of whitetail and aging deer. And one thing that I hear and see a lot of people talking about those is, how do I pattern a deer? They're there, but I don't ever see them. What do I do? And to me, you're really looking at two distinct things when it comes to deer season. I break it down to the early season, let's just call that the pre-rut, and then late season, let's call that the rut, for lack of better words. And I know a lot of people have a bunch of different scenarios that they'll talk about, little mini versions in the middle of all that, and I truly believe all that exists, but I really try to, in my mind, not make this more complicated than it is, because mentally, a deer, really, that's his focus in life. When they're in the summertime, they're big bachelor groups in velvet, they all get along as buddies. As they start to lose that velvet there, their testosterone starts getting a little tougher. They no longer become as big of buddies. They start breaking that big gang of them up into singular groups, and then as they really begin to get into that process, you start to see more rubs and more scrapes going on. You start to see single and double deer kind of running together. And then when you get into the rut, you really, in my opinion, struggle to pattern deer, because they're covering a tremendous amount of ground in those times of the year. I mean, one deer might show up in one area on a scouting camera on Monday, and by Tuesday he's 1,000 to 2,000 acres away chasing a doe, doing what he's supposed to be doing as part of the breeding process. So when you break those down, I really like to think about the pre-rut time of the year as a time of the year that I really want to focus on groups and areas. I really feel like in the pre-rut, in the early season, if I can find a deer that I'm interested in, my chances of harvesting that deer really grow up, because I think they're more of a creature of habit in the early season. And that's where scouting cameras really can give you a lot of data and frankly tell you that deer is there. And once you know he's there, and you can begin to break down his habits, his patterns in that early time of the year, they're very susceptible to being a creature of habit and doing the same thing over and over again. Now, each day that deer season goes on, I think it gets harder and harder to guarantee that pattern is going to hold up. Their urges, their search for food, the breeding process, the posturing and the fighting that goes on between dominant bucks can cause these deer to travel wide ranges. And once the rut begins, and once you get to that late season, I'm a guy that really likes to look at hunting big feeding areas, big food plots, areas where I know there's going to be a lot of does, and I will expand the time of day that I'm hunting. A lot of times in the early season, I hunt the first couple of hours of the day, and the last couple hours of the day. But when the rut comes, I'm just as apt to stay up in that stand as long as I possibly can. So understanding those 2 times of the year, breaking them down into those 2 simplistic deals, I think will help pay off in you harvesting a big old buck.